Seth strolled down the city's central street. Recently his company, where he'd been an engineer for nearly 15 years, relocated to a new building. The commute was more challenging due to the increased distance and traffic, but the bright, beautiful building and pleasing cityscape made up for it. The city centre was filled with parks, squares, and intellectual inhabitants. Rather than rushing to his car after work, Seth had begun to unwind by walking the streets. The lively atmosphere with children holding balloons, ice cream in hand, and lovely elderly couples made every day feel like a celebration. By the time he reached his car, the evening traffic had usually subsided. Home had become a more inviting place since Janet moved in. The apartment now smelled of fresh baked goods, homemade meals, and feminine fragrances. Janet was warm, kind, and comforting. Seth found his heart softening in her presence, despite the hardships he'd experienced. Not everyone could endure what had happened to Seth's family. The man once believed he was no longer capable of strong feelings, yet Janet proved him wrong. She brought quiet, calm joy to his life. Together they enjoyed watching TV series, going on picnics with friends, and travelling to the sea during the velvet season. Still, Seth was not entirely free from heavy thoughts. And how could it be otherwise, when it wasn't known to the end what happened to Susie? Young parents with small children, especially girls of 4 to 5 years old, still attracted Seth's attention, and now he observed one family in particular, a young mother and a father in a bright printed t-shirt and jean shorts. They had 2 children, a listless, bored-looking 8-year-old boy and a curious 4-year-old girl. Seth noticed the parents appeared slightly weary of their young daughter's incessant questions. The mother responded with one-word answers, while the father at times irritably asked the child to be quiet. Seth thought to himself how these young parents didn't realize the joy of holding their little daughter's hand and engaging in conversation with her. Seth would now happily answer a million questions from a 4-year-old girl. As the saying goes, we often fail to appreciate what we have. Years ago, Seth thoroughly enjoyed fatherhood. His daughter Susie never irritated him as a young father. Perhaps it was because he and his wife Janet had longed for a child. Seth and Janet met at the college, studying related engineering specialities. They attended many of the same lectures. Seth quickly noticed Janet, a beautiful, quiet student with large blue eyes. Being one of the few women in their faculty, Janet stood out with her light wavy hair, wide-open eyes, and refined features. However, Seth was drawn to her not only because of her beauty, but also her sincerity. Unlike other girls, Janet didn't flirt or deceive. She was genuinely passionate about her studies, much like Seth. Any attempts at romance from other students were firmly rejected. When Seth was paired with Janet for a project, their successful teamwork led to friendship, which eventually blossomed into romance. Janet and Seth had much in common. They grew up in similar families, shared interests, and their life plans largely aligned. Both wanted to build a career, achieve something, find their place, and then start a family. After getting married and renting an apartment, Janet worked in a research laboratory, continuing her scientific work. Seth chose an internship at the engineering department of a plant. Their initial salaries were modest, but as they climbed the career ladder, their incomes increased. Eventually, they were able to buy their own apartment and renovate it. The couple lived harmoniously. Seth found Janet's company easy and pleasant. They understood each other intuitively, resolving disagreements through discussion and negotiation rather than arguments. Seth's mother had once told him, with his pedantic and correct nature, no girl would tolerate him. She was proven wrong by Janet, who was as rational and conscientious as Seth. It seemed that they had found their perfect match. Seth was happy. His life was unfolding even better than he had dreamed. He had an interesting, high-paying job, a loving and understanding wife, and a beautiful home. 7 years into their marriage, Seth and Janet began discussing having children. They had prepared financially for their future heirs. All the grandparents eagerly awaited grandchildren and promised to help with childcare. This meant Janet wouldn't have to sacrifice her career at the research institute. The couple decided to approach parenthood consciously. They underwent a full medical examination to minimize the risk of health issues in their child. It was then discovered that Janet had serious fertility problems. Pregnancy is practically impossible, declared the famous doctor, whom Janet had finally managed to see. So there's no chance at all? Seth asked for clarification. He had accompanied his wife to the clinic that day. Well, you can try various treatment options, the doctor replied evasively, but these methods are expensive and time-consuming with no guaranteed result. Congenital abnormalities occur, unfortunately. This news was a shock to the couple. Everything had been going to plan, and then suddenly this happened. After the doctor's disappointing verdict, both Seth and Janet realized how much they wanted to become parents. The treatment period began with visits to various doctors, numerous tests, and Janet's periodic hospital stays. This process was expensive, time-consuming, and emotionally draining. The hope followed by repeated disappointment was difficult to hear. Janet, typically calm and rational, often cried when she thought her husband couldn't hear her. But he noticed everything, her red eyes, swollen eyelids, and most painfully her look of despair. Seth found it difficult to see his wife in this state. His primary desire was not for a child anymore, but for the happiness of the woman he loved. He didn't know how to help Janet. As best as he could, Seth supported his wife. He arranged consultations at the best reproductive centers in the country, accompanied her to painful procedures, and comforted her. Why don't we give up on this? Sometimes he suggested. The race for a child has already acquired some unhealthy character. Seth wanted to stop it. Let's develop our careers. It's important too. Before, work and scientific activity had been the main things in Janet's life. The woman's eyes lit up when she was told about the next development or experimental project. Work inspired Janet, gave her strength and energy. And she was good at what she did, very good. She was respected, invited to consultations, and was the person people turned to with difficult questions. Now Janet had changed a lot. She no longer took on interesting projects, worked strictly from 9 to 5 and was eager to head home. Once an outstanding scientist, now preferred simple routine work and completely abandoned her research. This really frightened Seth. Janet's changes made her tense. She became tearful, irritable, and somewhat capricious. Most distressing was her fixation on inaccessible motherhood, making it her sole focus. Nothing else interested or pleased her, and she stopped communicating with her friends and colleagues. Janet spent her spare time studying information about her diagnosis. Years passed this way. Occasionally Janet would calm down, return to work, but her dream of motherhood always resurfaced, leading to more doctor visits, tests and research. Medicine is always advancing. New reproductive technologies appear. Old ones improve. We have to try, she used to explain to her husband. Seth missed the old Janet, intelligent, driven, understanding. Sometimes she came back for a while, and those moments were blissful. They could discuss various topics, watch movies together and plan trips. We could adopt a child from the orphanage. Seth had suggested this to his wife multiple times. He believed that a child, even if not their own, would bring Janet joy and help her experience motherhood. However, Janet wanted only her own child and remained focused on this goal, oblivious to everything else. 15 years into their marriage, the much-anticipated pregnancy finally happened, thanks to another experimental treatment. Both Seth and Janet were almost 40. Seth hadn't anticipated this outcome. The news surprised and even slightly scared him, disrupting his usual routine. After so many years of living just the two of them, this was a significant change. Despite the constant nausea during her first months of pregnancy, the reoccurring abdominal and lower back pain, and frequent dizziness, Janet was ecstatic. Her pregnancy was challenging and required her to spend most of her time in the hospital, constantly receiving intravenous drips, taking medications, and enduring painful injections. There were several threats of miscarriage. Seth couldn't imagine what would happen to Janet if they lost the baby. Thankfully, the doctors managed to maintain the pregnancy due to Janet's strict monitoring. Truth be told, Seth didn't harbour any warm feelings for their future child. He literally viewed her or him as a problem, an obstacle preventing his wife from living a normal life. Susie was born, and Seth was the first to hold his tiny, wrinkled, red baby girl in his arms. Janet, his wife, insisted he be present during the birth. "This is a significant and long-awaited event," she said. "We've faced many challenges, and this is our reward. The doctors say we won't have more children, so—" Seth was reluctant to be in the delivery room. He feared the birth process and didn't feel any reverence for it, but he felt he had to be there. When Seth first saw his newborn daughter's face, he felt his world turn upside down. It had changed entirely. The baby screamed, overwhelmed by the sudden changes. Seth perceived that his daughter was cold and in pain. An innate instinct told him this. He held her close, gently rocking her in his arms. The baby sobbed a few more times, looked at him, and calmed down. She felt safe with her father. Seth realized that his daughter was now the most important person to him, and he would move mountains for her. Then the baby was handed over to her mother. Susie needed to be fed, and Seth was asked to leave the room. "You'll see them later," the midwife said with a smile. "The mother and baby need some time alone for now." Seth and Janet were devoted parents, endlessly fascinated by their little Susie. They found joy in everything she did, reaching for toys, moving her limbs, and even her humming. Her first smile, tooth, and steps were all momentous events for them. While Seth worked each day, Janet stayed home with Susie, immersing herself in motherhood. She had long awaited this role and embraced it fully. She cared for Susie, massaging her, cooking nutritious meals, taking her for walks, and diligently studying child development literature to apply the knowledge to her own child. As a result, Susie developed skills faster than her peers. She began to speak, draw, sculpt, and fasten buttons earlier than expected. Seth and Janet were thrilled with their clever, beautiful daughter. Susie physically resembled Seth's grandmother, with her thick dark hair, large brown eyes, and dark skin, prompting blonde-haired, fair-skinned Janet to jokingly lament, "Nothing of me." Seth would retort good-naturedly, "No surprise, they say dark genes are stronger." Regardless, Janet couldn't help but admire how Susie's dark eyebrows and long dark eyelashes made her so striking that she wouldn't even need a makeup. Susie was a gentle, obedient, and incredibly curious girl, a trait inherited from both parents. Her curiosity was a source of concern for Janet, as Susie was always exploring. She was fascinated with everything, from items on the top closet shelves, to the inner workings of an alarm clock, to the depths of a puddle. She would climb trees to get a closer look at fruits or flowers, and perch above puddles, peering intently into their darkness. The man was proud of his daughter's inquisitive nature. Janet shared this sentiment, but she was often tired from constantly looking after her. Regardless, she never complained, finding joy in the challenges that came with raising their daughter. Seth sometimes felt that his wife was overly protective of their only child. He thought it would be beneficial to give the girl more independence. However, he didn't interfere with Janet's parenting methods. Firstly, she was well-read on child-rearing literature. Secondly, Janet had long desired motherhood, and now finally becoming a mother, he felt it was best to let her take the lead in their child's upbringing. Susie adored her parents. She eagerly awaited her father's return from work, ready to bombard him with questions and engage in playful activities. Seth enjoyed taking walks with his daughter in the park after work, discussing various topics, from insects to cartoons. Janet would sometimes join them, but often she preferred to stay at home, enjoying the peace and quiet while preparing a delicious dinner. Seth often took Susie to the playground, where the little girl freely climbed on the slides and roundabouts, something she wouldn't do when her overly cautious mother was present. Susie quickly made friends with other children, and Seth was certain she would enjoy kindergarten. However, Janet resisted the idea. She had intentionally resigned from her job to take care of Susie herself. "I didn't have her just to leave her to other people's care," she said. "I want to fully enjoy motherhood. Besides, kindergarten is just a holding centre for working parents. I have many activities planned for our girl to help her development. It's better for her to stay with me." Although Seth didn't dispute her, he occasionally mentioned the benefits of kindergarten, highlighting the presence of other children and the activities like songs and dances. Janet was preparing her daughter for a career in science and believed that she must follow in her footsteps. Susie seemed to be able to excel in this direction, quickly grasping any information. However, Seth noticed other talents in her. Susie's voice was extraordinary, clear, resonant, and high-pitched. When she sang songs from cartoons, Seth would find himself listening intently. His experience in music school, though not particularly successful, equipped him with enough knowledge to recognize Susie's remarkable ear for music. "Maybe we should take her to a music teacher for an audition," Seth suggested to his wife. "Susie has talent." "She's still a little girl," Janet dismissed. "Music schools accept older kids. Susie doesn't need that. She'll be a great scientist, you'll see." Becoming a mother had filled Janet with joy, but she had changed. She was overly anxious and focused too much on Susie. Nonetheless, it was an improvement from the time when she was trying to conceive. Seth still loved Janet, perhaps even more than when they were young. They had formed a family, and their wonderful child was growing up. Despite minor issues like Janet's excessive anxiety for their daughter, their life was filled with happiness. Seth often spoiled his daughter Susie with surprise gifts like sweets, dolls, and stuffed animals. Nothing made him happier than seeing her eyes light up with joy at the sight of a new gift. Hearing her say, "Thank you, Daddy," melted his heart. He had never imagined he could feel such intense emotions for something else. Janet always ensured that Susie's birthdays were memorable. She planned elaborate celebrations with themed decorations and gifts. For Susie's second birthday, the theme was Disney princesses. Her third birthday was an underwater king's palace party, inspired by Susie's fascination with the Little Mermaid. The fourth birthday was unicorn-themed, reflecting Susie's love for these mythical creatures. In just an hour, Janet could transform their apartment into a magical haven for Susie's favourite characters. "I wish I could ride one," she said dreamily. Janet only smiled and waved her hand, saying, "Daughter, you understand unicorns live far away. They don't wander into our places." "I understand, and it's very, very unfortunate." Seth decided to fulfill his daughter's birthday wish by any means necessary. He visited the racetrack and spoke with instructors who handle ponies. He had a fantastic idea and attempted to bring it to life. One of the instructors enthusiastically embraced Seth's plan. Together, they devised a masquerade costume for a beautiful white pony, which would impersonate a unicorn. A twisted plastic horn on Velcro, pink ribbons for the mane and tail, aqua paint to draw hearts on the animal's sides, and a wreath of artificial flowers were all part of the transformation into a fairy tale character. Seth anticipated his daughter's joyous reaction. It was expensive, but he was willing to spend for his beloved little princess. With the main surprise prepared, Seth ordered a plush unicorn as a gift. The loving father didn't stop there. Susie was 4 years old, and it was time to give her something beautiful and elegant, something distinctly feminine. He wanted her to get used to it from a young age. So, Seth commissioned a jewellery workshop to create a wonderful set of silver bracelet and earrings. The unique detail was that the jewellery was crafted into tiny unicorns. Finding a craftsman willing to undertake such a complex task took a long time. Many professionals were reluctant to get involved. Eventually, an elderly jeweller agreed to the project. It was a lengthy process, filled with constant improvements and refinements. However, the final product was so beautiful that Seth couldn't help but admire it in awe. Janet was equally thrilled. "My God, what a miracle this is!" the woman exclaimed. "I've never seen anything like it." "And there's nothing else like it in the world," Seth proudly replied, relishing his wife's reaction. "This is exclusive, especially for our Susie. Look, there on the bracelet. Her name is engraved in calligraphic script. How sweet and exquisite it all is. A gift for a real lady," Janet concluded. Susie's 4th birthday party was a resounding success. She woke to an apartment adorned with balloons, vibrant pictures, and unicorn-themed decorations. Gifts from her parents were piled high on a chair next to her crib. Among the toys, fancy dresses and colourful books, the unicorn jewellery stood out. Susie immediately asked to wear a bracelet and had not taken it off since. Seth watched his joyful daughter with a smile. In the evening, guests arrived, and the apartment instantly buzzed with noise and laughter. Grandparents, friends of Janet and Seth, and children Susie's age all gathered. Susie, the birthday girl, was showered with gifts and compliments. However, she also wanted to surprise her guests. Dressed as a princess, Susie stood on a chair and sang a song from her favourite unicorn cartoon for everyone. Seth listened to his daughter's pure, ringing voice. His heart swelled with tenderness and joy. He marvelled at the beautiful, talented daughter that fate had bestowed upon him and Janet. He vowed once again to do everything in his power to ensure Susie's happiness. The guests applauded loudly, calling Susie back for an encore. She happily obliged, enjoying the attention and the compliments. Uninhibited, brave, and charismatic, Susie was a born performer. Despite his wife's plans, Seth knew their daughter was destined for the stage. He believed Janet would eventually understand. The evening's main surprise was yet to come. Both children and adults rushed outside, gathering on the porch. A real unicorn emerged from the archway, much to everyone's delight. Susie squealed with joy, an example quickly followed by the other children. A young fairy, played by an enthusiastic girl instructor, accompanied the unicorn. She wore a light floral sundress and let her blonde curls fall over her shoulders. May I go to him?" Susie asked the fairy, overcome with joy. Her biggest dream had come true. "Of course you can. He'll be happy to give you a ride," the fairy assured her. Susie enjoyed a couple of full rounds around the yard on the unicorn. After dismounting, she stroked its face and asked if her guests could also ride it. "Of course. He's here to make your party perfect." The young guests took turns riding the unicorn pony around the yard with joy in their eyes. Susie's party was unforgettable for them as well. Seth looked at his daughter, seeing her as not only intelligent and beautiful, but also kind and considerate. At the age of 4, she showed care for others by asking the fairy to give her guests a unicorn ride. What a thoughtful idea for a 4-year-old. It was a memorable day filled with vibrant impressions and equally vivid photos. One photo captured Susie hugging a new plush unicorn. A silver bracelet shone on her wrist, and a tiara crowned her head. She smiled broadly into the camera, radiating pure happiness. This was the photo Janet would hand over to investigators just 3 months later. One warm and sunny September evening, during the beautiful Indian summer, golden trees bathed in gentle sunlight and leaves rustled underfoot. Janet and Susie decided to enjoy the wonderful weather with a walk in the park, coinciding with the city's celebrations. The woman suggested a family walk in the park, but Seth declined due to work he had brought home from the factory. An important inspection was imminent and some reports needed to be urgently completed. "Regrettably, I won't be able to join my two beautiful ladies," Seth said, shaking his head, "though I would really like to." "But Daddy," Susie protested, pouting. Dressed in a light red dress and a matching beret, she looked charming. The beret was stylishly tilted to the side, and her shoulders were adorned with two tight braids tied with pink silk ribbons. Her new patent shoes added to her look. It wasn't a particularly modern style, but it was original and delightful. Janet enjoyed dressing her daughter up like a doll, always on the lookout for stylish, unique pieces. Susie usually stood out among other children. "Baby, I need to work." Seth waved his hands. "But don't worry. This weekend I promise we'll go to the ponds." "To the ponds?" Susie rejoiced. "That's great. We'll ride the Ferris wheel and feed the ducks buns, right?" "Yes," Seth smiled. "And then we'll go to the cafe to eat your favourite pancakes with berries. Deal?" "Deal. And now, have fun without me. But you'll tell me everything before bedtime and listen to your mum, okay?" "Okay." Susie hugged her father. Her red coat sleeves pulled up slightly, revealing her wrists. A silver bracelet with unicorns sparkled on one of them. The girl never took off her favourite jewellery. One of her earrings had already been lost due to an unreliable clasp. The second, now practically useless, lay in a box in Susie's desk. "Okay, we're off." Janet, her mother, smiled at her husband. Seth hugged his wife, kissed his daughter, walked them to the elevator, and waved at the closing door. The image of an all-dressed-up, happy Susie smiling at her father was still in his mind. Seth had no inkling that he would never see his daughter again. Seth returned to his apartment and sat at his computer, immersing himself in his work. He wanted to make the most of the quiet time before his daughter returned in a few hours. He knew she would want to share her experiences, and he would need to put his work aside to listen attentively. This parental engagement, Seth knew, was important for children. However, about an hour later, he heard a key turn in the lock. It was too early. Janet rushed into the living room, and Seth immediately noticed her dishevelled hair, unnatural paleness, trembling lips, and the panic in her eyes. "Susie didn't come back?" Janet asked, looking hopefully at her husband. Seth shook his head, his heart filled with terror. "But she was with you, wasn't she? What happened?" Seth asked, confused. Instead of responding, Janet dialed the police number in a rush. Seth found the details of the incident much later. First, Janet frantically searched the park for her daughter, interacted with the police, and attempted to calm herself down. Despite her hysteria, she managed to answer all the police's questions thoroughly. The search for the lost girl in the park began immediately. Police squads scoured the area, joined by volunteers. Trouble piled on the two unhappy parents, left no one indifferent. The police persuaded Janet and Seth to stay at home, arguing that the girl might return on her own. "We need someone home when she does. You won't be of help with the search," the policeman in uniform persuaded them. "It's unnecessary stress. We need to work calmly, without distractions. You understand?" Seth sat on the couch, holding his trembling wife tightly. Janet blamed herself relentlessly, using the harshest words. Initially, Seth wanted to blame Janet too. She wasn't vigilant enough. She lost sight of their child. However, upon seeing her state, he held back. There was no point in blaming someone already overwhelmed with grief. This could have happened to anyone. It was just an unfortunate accident. It wasn't Janet's fault. "We had such a good walk along the alleys," the woman sobbed as she shared her memories. "Susie was delighted with everything happening in the park. She loved the animators, photographers with monkeys, music, the smell of cotton candy and popcorn, and the children's masterclasses." The park was crowded that day, which was expected since it was City Day. Festive events always drew people from all over the city. The celebration's epicentre was the summer stage in the park's centre, where a festive concert showcased the region's best children's groups. The little artists sang, danced, played musical instruments, and acted out scenes from famous works. The hosts held contests for the young spectators between performances and awarded the winners with prizes. Susie was drawn to the stage. "I didn't want to go there with her," Janet told her husband. "The crowd was massive, and she's just a little girl. Why did we need to push through? But Susie, she wanted to see the concert so badly. She begged me, pleaded with me, even tried to bribe me. As always, she was determined." Seth nodded, understanding exactly what Susie's ambitions were. She dreamed of performing on stage one day, as she was innately an artist, and there was no stopping her. With that, Janet and Susie found themselves in the middle of a large crowd. Janet hoped that seeing the vast sea of people and the challenge of reaching the stage would deter Susie, but the little girl was undeterred and kept moving closer to the stage. A local rock band then started to play. They were a young band, but had already made it onto big TV. Had Janet known about the celebrity performance, she wouldn't have brought Susie into the crowd, knowing the implications. Janet sobbed. "There was such a crush. It felt like everyone in the park was surging towards the stage. I was terrified. I wanted to pick up Susie, but couldn't. We got separated, and she was lost in the sea of people." Janet tried to call out for Susie, but her voice was drowned out by the loud music and cheering crowd. Once the concert ended, the crowd quickly dispersed. Janet dashed around the stage, asking everyone if they had seen a little girl in a red coat with 2 pigtails. People merely shook their heads and went about their business. Janet scoured the paths, alleys and playgrounds, searching for a small, bright red figure. Susie was so brightly dressed, she should be easy to spot in the crowd, but the girl was nowhere in sight. Eventually, Janet came across an old guard. The elderly man listened to her and proposed a possibility, which gave Janet a glimmer of hope. "Perhaps your little girl has already run home. She might have lost sight of you and found her way home. Does she know the route?" Janet nodded. "She knows the way," and then hurried home, filled with hope and near certainty. Susie must be at home. Where else could she be? But, to her disappointment, she found only a surprised Seth in the apartment. Initially, the search was intense. Posters of the missing girl went up on the city's posts and walls. Janet selected a photo from Susie's birthday party for these posters. By the end of the second day, both volunteers and police officers began to express doubts about finding the child alive, as safe outcomes usually occur within the first few hours of disappearance. However, Seth and Janet refused to lose hope. They scoured the internet for stories of children who returned home unharmed after missing for weeks or even months. Such cases do exist, and they aren't rare. During this time, the couple struggled to eat, sleep, or drink. The uncertainty of their little girl's condition and whereabouts was unbearable. How could they eat, knowing she might be in danger? Both parents began to lose weight noticeably. Janet was constantly racked with guilt, sometimes becoming hysterical. The worst periods were when she would sit, sway slightly, and stare blankly at a fixed spot. Seth perceived this as her way of disconnecting from reality to reset her nerves, but it was a frightening sight. Throughout these trying days, he was worried about leaving her alone. Several weeks passed, and Seth returned to work. It served as a minor distraction, despite the lingering dreadful thoughts. What had happened to Susie? How was she being treated? The thought of his beloved daughter, who knew nothing but love, attention, and warmth, now in the care of strangers, was unbearable. He imagined Susie, scared and missing home, probably crying, and it tore at his heart. Janet was also distraught. Both her mother and Seth's mother stayed with her, fearing what she might do to herself. They constantly were reminding Janet that Susie would need her when she returned. But guilt and the longing to hold her daughter again weighed heavily on Janet. At times she was overcome with emotion, ripping her clothes, throwing dishes against the walls, and screaming in despair. Seth did not attempt to stop or calm her during these outbursts. 3 months had passed since Susie's disappearance. Winter had arrived, and the search efforts had quieted, though not ceased. The investigator admitted that the chances were slim, but assured them that the search would continue. The couple learned alarming statistics. Each year, many children disappear worldwide and are never found. This harsh reality had never crossed Seth's mind before. They had brought their delicate, talented girl into a world filled with sorrow and despair, and they had failed to protect her. The main theory of the investigation was kidnapping. After all, if the girl had merely gotten lost in the city or suffered an accident, she would have been found. However, Susie had vanished without a trace. Someone had evidently gone to great lengths to cover their tracks. As spring approached, a volunteer found Susie's clothing, her coat and beret, in a landfill. The investigator asked the parents to identify the garments. Janet immediately confirmed that they belonged to her daughter. She couldn't be mistaken, as she had been the one to buy the beautiful outfit for Susie. "What does this mean?" Seth asked hopefully. "It's difficult to tell," the investigator shrugged. "Maybe there's cause for reassurance. It appears the kidnapper didn't intend to harm the girl immediately. He discarded the clothes because they were conspicuous and could have drawn attention." "That's good," Janet whispered. After discovering the items, the couple felt certain that Susie would soon be found. They had waited so long without news, and finally they had a promising lead. But unfortunately the case stalled once again. Seth tried to encourage his wife to return to work. He knew that the research laboratory would gladly welcome her back, even after such a lengthy absence. Being involved in work she loved could help Janet regain a sense of purpose and normalcy. Her confinement within the 4 walls was draining her strength. "What are you saying?" Janet retorted. "So, I go back to work, and Susie comes home to find no one there? Do you understand what you're suggesting?" Now, Janet remained at home all the time, only leaving when her husband returned. She spent hours scouring the internet for stories of children happily returning home. These children had faced all sorts of predicaments. Some had run away and wandered the country, while others were kidnapped. Janet pondered various possibilities about her daughter's fate, but they were just guesses. 13 years passed. Janet had aged significantly, becoming a frail woman with serious heart issues. Seth found it incredibly painful to see his wife in such a state. She was still grappling with their loss. Seth was also hurting. He understood that the grief for their lost daughter would last forever. Unlike his wife, he accepted the situation, returning to life and work. On the contrary, Janet was driving herself to the brink of nervous exhaustion and illness. She blamed herself constantly. She would wake up screaming from terrible nightmares, despite frequent heart attacks and the doctor's strong insistence on hospitalization. Janet steadfastly refused. Seth would never admit it to his wife. She wouldn't understand, but sometimes he wished that Susie had finally been found, even if dead. Then perhaps Janet could accept the terrible truth. There would be some certainty, unlike now. The case made little progress. Over the years, the husband was repeatedly called to the station to identify children resembling Susie. Alerts for the missing girl were sent throughout the country. Occasionally, calls came in from various parts of the country. Concerned citizens claimed to have seen a girl who looked like Susie near a store, a playground, or a pond. Seth and Janet examined photos and surveillance video footage. Sometimes they were even shown homeless girls found at train stations, but Susie was never among them. "Take a closer look," the investigator urged. "Perhaps it's her. A lot of time has passed. She would have grown and changed." But both parents shook their heads. They were certain they would recognize their daughter, even if she had grown up. The investigators' calls only exacerbated Janet's condition. Each call brought a desperate hope followed by a bitter disappointment. These emotions reignited the pain she had felt years ago, often leading to hysterical breakdowns and self-blame. It took considerable effort for Seth to console his wife. Seth's acquaintances urged him to leave Janet, saying, "She herself is not living and she's preventing you from returning to normal life. You've accepted that Susie isn't coming back. You have a chance to remarry, perhaps become a father again." However, Seth couldn't imagine such a scenario. He still loved Janet. His wife was the closest person to him. Their shared tribulations had bonded them. While he no longer hoped for Susie's return, he still believed that Janet would recover from her immense grief and become herself again. He hoped they might travel again, believing a change of scenery would be beneficial. But things didn't work out. Another heart attack took Janet's life. She died in the arms of her distraught husband. The ambulance didn't arrive in time. He grieved. He was very sorry for Janet's ruined life. The man went over in his memory their life since the disappearance of their daughter, and tried to understand whether he could still do something for his wife to get her out of this state. It seemed that he couldn't. A few years later, Jasmine entered Seth's life. Approaching 60, he never imagined such a change in his destiny. Jasmine, one of his colleagues, was a divorced woman who single-handedly raised 2 sons. The boys had moved on. One was studying in the capital, and the other lived and worked in a distant seaside city. Accustomed to caring for others, Jasmine struggled with loneliness and feeling unneeded. Somehow, she and Seth gradually grew close. Seth felt at ease and content with this warm, caring woman. He reopened the joy of having someone who cared for and tried to please him. He also enjoyed feeling like a guardian and protector once more. Soon they were living together in Seth's apartment. He had renovated all the rooms long ago to erase reminders of his past family life. It was too painful to see the curtains chosen by Janet or the children's furniture brought specifically for Susie, and to realize that his daughter and beloved wife were no longer there and would never be again. Jasmine was well acquainted with the life story of her partner. She supported Seth, and her comfort took the form of hugs and gentle caresses, without pressuring him with unnecessary questions. In return, Seth also listened attentively to Jasmine's life stories. She had encountered hardships of a different kind. Her husband was an abusive alcoholic, and escaping him was a difficult task. Single-handedly raising 2 sons was no less challenging. Yet these trials didn't break Jasmine. They merely made her stronger. Of course, fate had prepared Seth for a much worse ordeal than to her. Despite this, he bore his sorrow, but thoughts of Susie haunted him from time to time. Anything could have triggered his memory of Susie, but this time it was a curious little girl bombarding her parents with questions. As the family continued their walk past Seth, he gave one last glance at the inquisitive child, smiling before turning the other way. He made his way towards a fountain. A small crowd had assembled in the square. Initially, he couldn't discern their interest, but then he heard a voice, clear, high, and resonant. Someone was singing at the fountain, obscured by the crowd. The invisible girl was singing a melody from a cartoon about unicorns, Susie's favourite. The young singer's voice bore a striking resemblance to Susie's. Seth felt tears welling up in his eyes as a fresh wave of longing for her gripped him. Unable to ignore the singing, Seth weaved through the crowd and was astounded by the sight that met his eyes. A girl, about the same age Susie was when she disappeared, was standing by the fountain. She bore a faint resemblance to Susie, despite her clearly Romany features. Dark skin, long loose hair, black eyebrows and enormous brown eyes. She wore a long-sleeved blouse and a floor-length skirt adorned with ruffles. Around her neck was a bulky necklace, seemingly too large for such a petite girl. The little gypsy girl diligently played a tune that was painfully familiar to the man, dancing to the beat. The listeners smiled and generously tossed coins and bills into the box at the young performer's feet. Seeing the reception she received, the girl played with even more zeal. She suddenly raised her hands, executing another dance routine. Bracelets shone on her thin wrists. Seth was taken aback when he recognized one of the bracelets. Unicorns! It was an exclusive piece, for his daughter. Seth needed to examine the jewelry closer to be completely sure, but he already had a strong hunch. The girl finished the song, and the crowd applauded before dispersing. Seth remained frozen by the lamppost, unsure of what to do. He could approach the child and ask about the bracelet, but he didn't want to scare the little girl. It was better to wait for an adult to come for her. Surely they were nearby and wouldn't leave a young girl alone. And indeed, a few minutes later, a swarthy, black-eyed, curly-haired teenager approached the girl. He smiled at the singer, asked her something, and she responded. The boy patted her on the head, picked up the money box with his free hand, and led the girl away from the square. Concerned, Seth trailed the children. He wasn't sure of his next course of action. Should he approach the boy directly? If he did, the boy would likely grab the little girl and dash away. The boy seemed cautious, and undue attention might scare him off. So Seth kept his distance and continued to follow them. The children went past the main square, navigated through a maze of narrow streets, and found themselves on the city's outskirts. A vacant lot lay beyond the street, followed by a bypass road. From a distance, Seth spotted a camp, wagons, people around fires, and people's noise. So, this is where the children were headed. Seth contemplated following them and speaking to the adults, but would he be welcomed? Despite his apprehension, he felt compelled to continue his investigation. For the first time in years, he had found a potential lead about Susie. Could this be the breakthrough he needed to find his daughter? Would he finally uncover what happened to his princess? With determination, Seth continued to follow the children. Suddenly, the boy noticed him, looked back warily and quickened his pace. The little girl could barely keep up with him, running through the grass with her tiny feet in stubby sneakers. Suddenly, from the last house on the street, a young Romany woman appeared. It was clear that she was the mother of the little singer. The girl quickly withdrew her hand from the boy's grasp, ran to the woman, and embraced her. The beautiful Romany woman showered the child's face with kisses, whispering affectionate words into her ear. The little singer laughed joyfully. Seth stood frozen in place. A young Romany girl? Her hair, eyes, eyebrows, lips. She bore a striking resemblance to Seth's grandmother, who Susie also looked so much like. The realization hit Seth like a cold splash of water. No, it can't be. The woman's tanned face, white-toothed smile, large gold earrings, and a distinctive mole. A mole on her cheek, which Seth found himself surprisingly familiar with. It was shaped like a small heart, just like Susie's. Susie had always been glad that she had the same mark on her cheek as the unicorn from the cartoon. The woman noticed Seth's intense gaze, and her smile slowly faded. She held the child closer and was about to leave when Seth called out to her. "Susie! Susie!" The gypsy paused, scrutinizing the strange, mature man before her. Clutching her daughter, she resolutely approached him. "Excuse me," Seth began. "Don't be scared, I won't harm you. I just need you to make a prediction." The latter phrase slipped out unexpectedly, the first thought that crossed his mind. After all, it was known that gypsy women told fortunes for a living. "Fortune-telling?" The girl grinned, and the little girl in her arms mirrored her smile. "All right, I'll tell your fortune. Esmeralda, go back to the camp and wait for me there." The girl nodded obediently and scurried off towards the gypsies' camp, following the boy, who was already near the vacant lot. "Is her name Esmeralda?" Seth asked, smiling at the gypsy woman. The more he observed her, the more he was convinced that she was the grown-up Susie. The man realized he might be letting his imagination run wild, but there were too many coincidences. The song from his daughter's favorite cartoon, sung by little Esmeralda, the bracelet on the girl's hand, and the young gypsy woman's appearance. "Yes, my daughter's name is Esmeralda," the woman finally responded. "What do you want me to predict?" "Many years ago, my daughter was kidnapped while out for a walk with her mother. They got caught in a crowd, and she was lost in the crush. She was never found. I want to know what happened to her. I'm willing to pay whatever the cost," Seth said. "Kidnapped daughter?" The gypsy woman's voice trembled. "That's frightening. I can't predict such a thing. May I ask where your little girl got that bracelet?" "My daughter had the same one," Seth asked, afraid that the woman might leave after his question. "I also have a question. Why did you call me Susie?" she countered. "That was my daughter's name, and I thought that—" "That I was her," she interrupted. "Yes," Seth admitted, chuckling at the unexpected turn of their conversation. "My name is Penelope. That's what the gypsies call me. But on the back of this bracelet, which I've never parted with, it says Susie. I came up to you because you called me by that name. It's strange and interesting." "I can't believe it. Apparently, you really might be my daughter. Tell me about yourself, please. Who are your parents? How long have you been in gypsy camp? Were you born there?" Penelope shook her head. "No, I'm a foundling. My father found me ragged and hungry at the train station. I don't remember it myself, I was small. But this bracelet, it's been with me as long as I can remember. They told me my grandmother gave it to me. Now I realize it's from another life. I always knew it. I ordered it for my daughter's 4th birthday," Seth said, shaking his head. "It's unique. There can be no mistake. It belonged to Susie. I believe that's you. Tell me more about yourself." Penelope sighed. "From the moment I arrived in this town with my family, everything felt familiar. The cityscapes, the smells, the situations. Now, our meeting. I want to understand it all too." Little Penelope always knew that her father, Sylvanus, had picked her up at the train station. "Your family abandoned you. White people often do that to get rid of unwanted children. We Roma have a different attitude towards children." The Sylvanus' family, already having 4 sons, welcomed a little girl into their home. She was treated with care and tenderness by her mother Camille, grandmother Rini, and her brothers. The little girl, who had a gift for singing and dancing, quickly became a beloved and valued member of the family. Her talents also presented a potential source of income for the family. She particularly enjoyed performing with her brothers, dancing and singing around the fire, to the approval and applause of their community. Like the rest of their community, the family lived in a van, travelling across the country and stopping in various towns. The scenery, the people, and the homes all changed as they moved. Penelope experienced both large metropolitan cities and smaller urban settlements, meeting new people and performing in public squares. This was how the gypsies earned their living. Upon arriving at a new settlement, the children would sing and dance, the women would tell fortunes, and the men would engage in their own secretive, serious business. Only when she grew older did Penelope understand what this business entailed: stealing. This was the reason they never stayed in one place for too long, to avoid persecution, retaliation, and the police. Penelope liked her way of life. She loved her strict father, Sylvanus, her affectionate and talkative mother Lavinia, and her caring yet different brothers. She had a particularly close relationship with her grandmother, Renee, Sylvanus's mother. The old woman doted on Penelope, telling her stories, giving her jewellery, and performing rituals to keep her happy and healthy. She often reminded Penelope how lucky she was because Sylvanus had found her alone and abandoned at a train station. "They frequently spoke ill of my biological parents," Penelope said, studying Seth's face for familiar features. "They claimed that white people were irresponsible towards their children, but I saw a different picture on city streets. Yes, there were street children, but I also saw many affluent families with happy and secure children. Finally, I deduced that it was my biological parents who were at fault, because why else would a child be left at a train station?" She looked at Seth defiantly. He understood her implication. If he truly was her father, then he was responsible for leaving a little girl alone at a train station, hungry and in rags. "How did I end up at the train station?" the gypsy girl asked, staring at the man. "Didn't you watch your daughter? Or did you decide to abandon her?" "What are you speaking?" Seth retorted. "Our little girl was our most precious treasure." He began to reminisce about the blissful 4 years he and Janet had spent with their beautiful daughter. He described the struggle they faced to have a child, then narrated Susie's early years, recollecting those warm, joyful moments. It happened, he had forgotten very little. He remembered Susie's first skills, their shared travels, walks, and splendid holidays that Janet had planned for her daughter. "Our girl loved unicorns and sang beautifully, just like your daughter Esmeralda. How did she know the song she sang at the fountain? That's Susie's favourite song. She used to sing it in a very similar way." Penelope didn't respond immediately. She seemed to be trying to remember something. "I taught it to her," the woman finally said. "Something from my past life lingered. Not just the bracelet. I remembered that song. I could read at the age of 4, surprisingly, and I've retained that ability. We don't teach girls to read, only boys, and even then, only superficially. But I can read. Sometimes I dreamed about people who loved me deeply. I don't remember their faces, but I remembered their hands, warm and caring. I thought it was my imagination. Also, just now, when you were telling the story, I recalled something. Yes, I really rode a unicorn. A real one. I've dreamt of this scene several times, and the unicorn was exactly as you just described it. So, are we really father and daughter?" "We can only confirm after a DNA analysis," Seth said, his voice trembling. "But it appears to be true." Penelope pressed her fingers to her temples and wrinkled her nose, just like her mother used to do when she was worried. "So, what do we do now?" The young woman looked at the mature man, her face filled with confusion, seeking reassurance. "I think we need to verify everything to be sure, but I no longer doubt that you are Susie. There are too many coincidences. I think you should go back to your real home, or do you want to keep living in a gypsy camp? Didn't you mention that you were happy with the gypsies?" "That's how it was when I was a kid." Penelope shook her head. "When I grew up, everything changed. Children in the camp are treated very differently, but life for adults is not sweet at all. There are many chores, and women must obey men unquestionably. A husband can even beat his wife for disobedience, and he faces no consequences. I can't do what I want to do. Read, walk, study, and I have to deceive people for money. That's the most unpleasant thing. If I don't bring money home in the evening, I'll be punished. And I've been punished more than once." Penelope then recounted how Sylvanus married her off when she was about 16 years old. Her family had chosen a suitable groom for their only daughter, the son of a well-off gypsy. Damien The groom was as young as Penelope. It was well known in the camp that he was passionately in love with someone else. However, the girl was not his equal, so marriage was not possible. Penelope cried before the wedding. She didn't want to get married. Even though Damien was young, handsome and wealthy, she still felt like a child. Moreover, she was aware of the groom's feelings for another girl. They eventually got married due to family pressure. This union brought Esmeralda into their family. Penelope discovered a deep love for her daughter. Esmeralda became the center of her world, providing a beacon of light in her life. Damien, however, remained indifferent to both his wife and daughter, focusing on his own interests. Everyone was aware of this, but it was accepted behavior for a man. Penelope didn't mind and felt no jealousy. Her attention was completely absorbed by her daughter. She sang songs to her, crafted beautiful clothes for her, and braided her hair. Esmeralda inherited her mother's talent for singing and dancing. The people of the camp decided to utilize this gift fully. As Esmeralda became older, she became a street performer. She performed in various city squares, and did so with enjoyment. The audience applauded the young girl, generously compensating her for her performances. Esmeralda would respond to their appreciation with a happy smile. However, Penelope was deeply concerned about her daughter's future. She realized that Esmeralda was destined to follow the same path as she had. Esmeralda wouldn't receive an education or a professional career, instead continuing to entertain people with her voice. Penelope feared that as Esmeralda grew older and lost her childlike charm and spontaneity, she would be made a fortune-teller. "I believe they kidnapped you in the crowd," Seth said, looking at his daughter. Convinced now, he regretted the lost years his daughter spent in among strangers, adhering to unfamiliar traditions and strict rules. But everything would change now. "It's possible," she shook her head. "In my time it didn't happen, but Grandma Rini told me that in the past, childless gypsy couples would pick up children from city streets. They'd choose young ones who would barely remember the past and raise them as their own. Grandma Rini said they tried to find dark-haired babies to avoid suspicion. A blonde child amongst dark-haired gypsies would be conspicuous." "And you look just like my grandmother," Seth smiled. "I'll show you the pictures later. The resemblance is uncanny. That fact probably worked against us too. The gypsies chose you because you looked somewhat like them." "Still, can't believe it." Penelope looked completely lost. She glanced between the tower, clearly visible from here, and Seth. "So you're going to leave there, right now? You'll take the child, claim her as your own, and never return. I'll go with you, just in case." "It's not that simple. They won't let me leave." "What do you mean they won't let you leave? I'll call the police. They'll be arrested for kidnapping." "No, we have to handle this differently. You don't know these people. We need to act secretly. Afterward, we'll have to leave because they'll be searching for me, and they'll eventually find me. Betrayal is severely punished here. You'll be in danger too. Consider it. Do you really want all this? Do you want to disrupt your peaceful life? Take your time. It's a big decision." "Of course I'm ready," Seth responded immediately. "All right, then let's do it this way. Tomorrow I'll go with Esmeralda to the square. I always accompany her. We're monitored during the day. They check in the morning, then around noon, and again in the evening. At 11. Come get us at 11. We're not being followed at that time. We'll have to hide, lie low for a while, maybe a week, maybe a month. They'll be searching for me." "Hide in my apartment. No one's going to search for you there." "Do you live alone?" Penelope asked. "No one will mind us?" "No, but I'm not alone," Seth said, but he was certain that Jasmine would understand, as she always did. "Is that my mum? Your wife?" Seth shook his head again. A painful sting shot through his heart. Janet hadn't waited for her daughter and had gone without knowing what happened to Susie. It was so painful, so sad. "Tomorrow at 11. I'll come for you." "Okay, I have to go now." Penelope quickly turned around and rushed to the gypsy camp. It seemed she was already expected there. For the rest of the day and night, Seth was in an odd state. He was filled with joy and then suddenly filled with doubt. What if Penelope was not Susie after all? Standing next to the girl, he had no doubt that she was his daughter. But now, when she was far away, it seemed to him that he had imagined this meeting and manipulated the facts to fit his narrative. Jasmine, who always listened attentively to Seth, was also very excited, almost to the point of tears. Unlike Seth, she was certain that everything would be all right. "This woman is definitely Susie. Such coincidences are impossible. I can't wait to meet her and her daughter." Seth didn't sleep that night, tossing and turning. He was preoccupied with the thought that Susie and Esmeralda might not show up at the square by the fountain the next day. Susie, being quite capable of changing her mind, might choose a different life path. Or was she just tricking him? Why? Perhaps she just enjoyed fooling others? The next day, both Jasmine and Seth took time off work. Seth arrived at the fountain earlier than the agreed time. Little Esmeralda, just like the previous day, delighted the crowd with her clear, ringing voice. Susie was initially out of sight, but then Seth spotted her. She sat at a distance, watching her daughter intently. They locked eyes and she gestured for him to take his time. He nodded in understanding and kept observing, trying not to miss an important moment. Finally, Susie stood up from the bench, quickly walked over to Esmeralda, took the little girl into her arms, and then hurried over to Seth. From there, they all strolled through the narrow streets until they reached the parking lot, where Seth had left his car. Penelope constantly looked over her shoulder, worried that she was being followed, but there was no one behind them. Jasmine welcomed the two runaways, providing them with comfortable clothes and a homemade meal. She loved caring for others, and now had two individuals in need of affection and comfort. Penelope glanced around, as if trying to recall the past. "I've renovated the apartment. It's completely transformed since you lived here," Seth explained. "But you know, the feeling from the window seems familiar," the young woman responded thoughtfully. "Something's missing, though. I think there used to be a tall tree here. Its branches would scratch against the glass. I really used to enjoy that back then." "It was cut down," Seth replied, surprised at Susie's detailed memory. "It had blocked the light, so it was removed." "That's a shame." The grandfather and his young granddaughter strolled along the seashore, their bare feet imprinting the wet sand. Esmeralda was full of questions, much like her mother had been. She was a quick and clever girl, already displaying an aptitude for learning. Seth was certain she would excel in school, as she could already read, write, and count with ease. Seth was now escorting Esmeralda to music school. The family had agreed that her evident talent shouldn't be wasted, and Susie enrolled her in music classes. Initially, the teachers were hesitant due to Esmeralda's young age, and suggested waiting another year. However, their opinions changed after hearing her audition. It was a sunny day in September, and school had begun. Seth accompanied Esmeralda to her 4th music lesson. So far, she was thrilled with the music school, and he hoped her enthusiasm would persist. If not, they would explore other interests for Esmeralda. The man could hardly believe how his life had changed. A year prior, Penelope and Esmeralda had hidden in the apartment for about a month. The gypsy camp had left long ago, but gypsies continued to prowl the city, questioning people. Once, a young man even approached Seth, asking if he had seen a gypsy woman with a small child, adding that she was mentally ill and dangerous. Unable to feel at ease in the city, Susie proposed to move to another place. She was certain they would return to punish her for her betrayal. As always, for the sake of her daughter's happiness and tranquility, Seth was prepared for anything. Jasmine supported him and suggested a relocation to a seaside town where her youngest son lived. So there they were, in a quiet, cosy place by the sea. Jasmine had secured a job at the local library. She enjoys babysitting her son's children and Esmeralda. The children have become friends and enjoy their time together. Susie is gradually adjusting to her new world. Once, Janet had big plans for her daughter's career. The years have passed irrevocably, and Susie, without formal education, is now studying at a hairdressing course. In the evenings she sings at a restaurant, much to the audience's delight. She enjoys the stage, and the extra income is a bonus. Seth is now at ease about his daughter. She is smart, motivated, and hard-working. She's made many friends in her new place, although she is cautious about discussing her past, fearing that rumours may lead the Roma to find her. She still grapples with some fears, but Seth and Jasmine are there to support her. "All right, let's get our shoes on," Seth commanded, carrying his flip-flops and his granddaughter's sandals in his free hand. "Shall we take a dip? The water is so warm. We'll be quick," suggested the girl. "You'll be late for class," the happy grandfather smiled. "Let's do it later, after class." "Come on," agreed Esmeralda placidly. "Then we'll go to the pond, to the city, feed the ducks, okay?" Seth glanced at his granddaughter, reminded of little Susie, who often asked him to accompany her to the pond to feed the ducks. Seth was quite content. His daughter, his granddaughter, his beloved woman were beside him. Only thoughts of Janet troubled him. He deeply regretted that his wife never learned about the fate of their lost daughter, but there was nothing he could do about it. "Grandad, what are you thinking about?" Esmeralda tugged at Seth's arm and demanded an answer. "You've got that sad face again." "It's not sad. It's pensive. I'm trying to decide if, after class, we should go to a pizza place or an ice cream parlor." "I don't know." The girl puzzled, then smiled slyly and asked, "Grandad, do I have a pensive face like yours right now, too?" Seth looked at this bright, happy child and smiled. All sad and worrisome thoughts immediately left his head.
Hola, suscríbete a Historias Vitales para no perderte nuevas historias. Mi esposa había estado trabajando en su proyecto especial durante 4 meses ahora. No era su proyecto personal, pero ella era la persona principal y responsable de su éxito. El proyecto estaba diseñado para salvar a su empresa, Bixler Enterprises. Los últimos 4 meses habían sido difíciles porque se vio obligada a trabajar duro. Era importante tanto para ella como para la empresa. Había una buena posibilidad de que Bixler Enterprises quebrara si el proyecto no se completaba. Sarah tenía una licenciatura de Albrecht y un MBA de Wharton. Era la más inteligente de la familia. Yo empecé a trabajar como mecánico de autos justo después de la secundaria y después de 21 años seguía siendo mecánico de autos. No me importaba porque me gustaba el trabajo y pagaba bien. Era suficiente para pagar la universidad de Sarah y criar a 2 hijos. No vivíamos lujosamente, pero estábamos bien. Los niños ya se habían mudado, y las cosas iban bastante bien con nuestros ingresos. Sarah quedó embarazada 3 meses después de casarnos a la edad de 18 años. Durante los primeros años de nuestro matrimonio, vivimos con mis padres. Ellos tenían una gran casa vacía ya que 4 de mis hermanos se habían mudado. Eso significaba que teníamos una niñera mientras Sarah completaba sus primeros años de universidad. Debido a 2 embarazos, la carrera de 4 años le llevó 6 años completarla. Fue difícil, pero lo logró. Siempre tuve trabajo y nunca me faltó trabajo extra si lo necesitaba. Después de que Sarah se graduó de Wharton, alquilamos nuestro propio lugar. Tuvo ofertas de trabajo de varias empresas grandes, pero todas requerían que nos mudáramos. A mí no me importaba, pero Sarah quería quedarse cerca de casa. Por eso decidió trabajar en Bixler Enterprises. Pagaba bien, pero lo más importante, le daba responsabilidad y la oportunidad de avanzar. Sara era una empleada trabajadora y dedicada. La presentación es el jueves en el Hotel Dicen en Filadelfia. Tomé unos días libres en el trabajo para ayudarla según fuera necesario. Al final, todo lo que logré fue hacerle algo de comer cuando llegaba a casa. No sabía nada sobre su trabajo, ni tampoco quería saber. Los negocios corporativos de alto nivel me aburrían. Empresarios de Europa, Asia y América del Sur venían aquí, la empresa pagaba sus boletos de avión y proporcionaba habitaciones en el Hotel Dicen mientras estaban aquí. Era caro como el infierno, y por algunas cosas que Sara había dicho, la empresa estaba sobreestimando sus finanzas. Su presentación era importante para ella, para la empresa y para más de 200 empleados. Hasta el martes por la noche, todo iba bien. Sara llegó a casa con un traje nuevo, un traje gris con una blusa blanca. Desplegó todo lo que necesitaba en la cama de la habitación de invitados. Cuando se trataba de la limpieza de la casa, ella era normal, pero cuando se trataba del trabajo, era meticulosa. No entendía por qué necesitaba sacar su ropa interior de lujo, pero no dije nada. Además de su traje para la presentación, tenía varios vestidos de cóctel lindos para eventos sociales antes y después del evento. Siempre había evitado tales eventos, pero me sentía obligado a ir con ella si ella quería que lo hiciera. Me agradeció la oferta, pero dijo que no era necesario. Todos los materiales y equipos que necesitaba estaban guardados ordenadamente en el maletero de su Volvo. Antes de salir del trabajo, ella misma conducía el coche para asegurarse de que todo estuviera en perfectas condiciones. Tenía todo el día miércoles para prepararse y toda la noche del miércoles para socializar con sus invitados. Sara era tan buena en lo que hacía que sentía que habría sido mejor si simplemente me hubiera mantenido alejado de ella. Finalmente, había terminado. Lo había revisado y vuelto a revisar todo. Todo lo que necesitaba ahora era una ducha caliente y una buena noche de sueño. Supongo que mi error fue que empecé a revisar sus cosas después de que Sara comenzara a ducharse. Pensé que estaba ayudando, pero resultó ser lo contrario. Estaba moviendo cosas en la cama cuando un pequeño sobre blanco cayó del bolsillo lateral de su bolso de maquillaje. Una carta de una farmacia, pero no del tipo que solemos usar. Dentro había 10 pastillas. No tenía idea de qué era, PREN, y las instrucciones eran confusas. Si es necesario, tomar una pastilla y luego una segunda pastilla 12 horas después. Pensé que podría ser algo que ella había conseguido para la ansiedad o los nervios, pero las instrucciones no tenían sentido. La receta estaba escrita a su nombre el lunes. Volví a poner el sobre en su lugar mientras ella terminaba de ducharse. Decidí que quería saber más sobre PREN antes de contarle sobre ello. Por supuesto, si lo mencionaba, significaría que estaba revisando sus cosas. Odio los dilemas. Mientras Sara se preparaba para dormir, fui a nuestro ordenador doméstico y busqué. 10 minutos después, me uní a mi esposa bajo las sábanas. Pasé toda la noche despierto, preguntándome por qué mi esposa había recogido una receta para la píldora del día después, especialmente después de que me hicieran una vasectomía hace 10 años. A la mañana siguiente, me levanté temprano, pero no estaba descansado. Di un largo paseo, esperando que despejara mi mente. Me dirigí hacia casa con reticencia, temiendo lo que podría hacer o decir cuando llegara allí. Mi hijo Joe se unió a la Marina después de la escuela secundaria y estaba en su primer año en San Diego. Nuestra hija Gloria se casó con su amor de la infancia el año pasado y acababa de mudarse a Dallas. Eso dejaba solo a Sara y a mí. Echaba de menos a los niños, pero esperaba envejecer con mi esposa. Ella era la única mujer que me había interesado, y ahora todo estaba. Si Sara estaba teniendo una aventura, lo ocultaba bien. Por supuesto, nunca la vigilé. Nunca miré sus correos electrónicos o llamadas telefónicas. No tenía razones para hacerlo. No tenía forma de saber qué estaba haciendo en el trabajo o después del trabajo. Confiaba en ella completamente. ¿Dónde demonios has estado? ¿Quieres huevos o algo? No, solo café. No me sentía con muchas ganas de hablar. ¿Qué pasa, cariño? Solo son 3 días. Puedes venir si quieres, pero te aburrirás como una ostra. No, realmente no quiero ir, pero odio dejarte sola. Me preocupo cuando no estás aquí. Es muy dulce, querido, pero estará bien. No voy a salir del hotel en todo este tiempo. Pasaré la mayor parte del día asegurándome de que la sala de conferencias esté lista, y esta noche tendré una agradable charla con nuestros posibles clientes. Mañana, probablemente ni siquiera tendré la oportunidad de ir al baño. Llegaré a casa lo más temprano posible el viernes, te prometo un gran fin de semana si sabes a lo que me refiero. Todo eso suena bien, pero no puedes culparme por preocuparme. Soy un mecánico de autos, y tengo una esposa hermosa y exitosa. A veces tengo la sensación de que estás menos interesada en mejorar nuestra situación familiar que en avanzar en tu carrera. Detente, maldita sea, Ion. Siempre he respetado lo que haces para ganarte la vida y nunca he insinuado lo contrario. Criaste a 2 grandes niños y me pusiste a través de la universidad. Eres un gran esposo, un gran padre y un buen proveedor, y nunca olvides eso. Terminé mi café mientras ella recogía la mesa. ¿Quieres que te llame? No, no es una buena idea. Tendré el móvil apagado, y voy a apagar el teléfono de la habitación por la noche para poder dormir. Te llamaré siempre que pueda. La ayudé a cargar el coche, era tan meticulosa con eso como con todo lo demás. Trabajando, le llevaría 3 horas llegar al hotel Dicen. Me quedé en el porche y la vi marcharse. No me molesté en preguntarle por las pastillas. Pasé el resto de la mañana en el porche. No recuerdo haberme preocupado tanto como ahora. Me sentía pequeño e insignificante. Me sentía fuera de mi liga. Era un tipo de pueblo con un trabajo mediocre y una esposa exitosa. Era una combinación equivocada. Debería haberlo notado antes. Me sentía estúpido. El mejor traje que tenía era una chaqueta azul y un par de pantalones. Al menos tenía algunas corbatas, aunque tenían 10 años de antigüedad. Acababa de terminar de vestirme cuando sonó el teléfono fijo. Oye, cariño, solo quería avisarte de que llegué bien. ¿Tuviste un buen viaje? Supongo que el tráfico no estaba demasiado denso. Estuvo bien. Te llamaré esta noche. Ahora tengo que irme. Estoy en la habitación 714, Sara. Puedo estar en casa de mis padres o en la de mis hermanos esta noche si quieres llamarme a mi móvil. De acuerdo. Suena el teléfono móvil. Te quiero, tengo que irme. Me tomé mi tiempo para llegar a Filadelfia. No fui directo al Dicen, primero me detuve y compré un filete con queso. Prometí hacer una larga noche. No estaba seguro de qué iba a hacer. Estacioné en el garaje del hotel y simplemente esperé. Tarde o temprano, tenía que entrar en el hotel. Simplemente no podía decidir cuándo hacerlo. El sonido de mi teléfono celular me ayudó a tomar mi decisión. Ion, solo quería avisarte de que todo se ha arreglado. Ahora voy a bajar para encontrarme con algunas personas y cenar. No olvidaste nada, ¿verdad? No, todo está bien. Tengo todo en mi habitación para mañana. ¿Necesitas algo? No, Ion, relájate. Voy a apagar mi teléfono. Te llamaré mañana por la mañana. ¿De acuerdo? Ríe, diviértete. No es divertido, Ion, es trabajo. No parecía estar demasiado fuera de lugar. El vestíbulo, el restaurante y las salas de conferencias estaban llenos de gente, así que pude pasar desapercibido. Había un folleto pequeño y bonito que mostraba el diseño de todas las habitaciones del hotel. Me paseé por las diferentes habitaciones y me detuve en las paredes, mirando alrededor entre la multitud. No tenía ni idea de qué haría si Sara me veía. Lo averiguaría si y cuando eso sucediera. Encontré un tablero de eventos que enumeraba todas las habitaciones que estaban siendo utilizadas por los diversos grupos. Bixler Enterprises no tenía habitaciones disponibles para el miércoles por la noche. Esto me pareció interesante. Sara había dicho que no iba a salir del hotel, pero ahora no estaba tan seguro de eso. Había 3 comedores, familiar, informal y de alta cocina. A Sara no le gustaba mucho cenar con niños, así que fui primero al comedor informal. Solo me llevó 5 minutos asegurarme de que no estaba allí. Tuve mejor suerte en el salón gourmet, era una acogedora mesita encajada en la esquina, el tipo de mesa que la gente reserva para tener un encuentro privado. Sara llevaba un vestido de cóctel negro con un escote pronunciado y perlas, se veía elegante y su acompañante parecía apreciarlo. Conocía a algunas personas con las que trabajaba Sara, y él no era una de ellas. Me resultaba familiar, pero no había forma de que pudiera recordarlo. Había muchas sillas libres, así que no tuve problemas para cruzar la sala. Había velas y pequeños candelabros de cristal en las mesas. Apagué la mía y le dije al camarero que me molestaba por el glaucoma. Pedí el plato de pollo de siempre y me acomodé. El camarero me sirvió el café por tercera vez. Disculpe, el tipo en la mesa de enfrente me parece muy familiar. ¿Sabes quién es? Sí, ese es Malcolm Eugene Foote. Es miembro del Consejo Municipal, se espera que se postule para el Congreso en los próximos años. ¿Es esa su esposa con él? Es muy bonita. No, esta es la primera vez que la veo. Siempre usa esa mesa para señoras especiales, si me entiende. Simplemente le sonreí y pedí la cuenta. Nunca había visto a Sara tan sensual con un hombre antes. Parecía captar cada palabra que decía, como si fuera Dios o algo así. No estaban haciendo nada inapropiado, pero tampoco era platónico ni profesional. Cuando me fui, estaban terminando su segunda botella de vino. Ahora entendía por qué se había llevado su lencería elegante. Me acomodé en una esquina del vestíbulo para que no me vieran. 10 minutos después, salieron del restaurante. Ella le tomaba la mano mientras caminaban por el vestíbulo hacia el ascensor. Observé cuidadosamente los indicadores de piso. Que el ascensor se detuviera en el tercer piso era una buena señal, significaba que no lo había llevado a su habitación. Era una mala señal cuando el ascensor no llegaba al 7º piso, significaba que ella fue a su habitación. Por si acaso me equivocaba en algo, me senté en el vestíbulo y observé el ascensor durante 1 hora. La gente entraba y salía, pero Sara no estaba entre ellos. Saqué mi maleta vacía del coche y me dirigí al mostrador de recepción. Aunque podía demostrar que era su esposo, me costó trabajo conseguir una tarjeta llave. Se dieron después de llamar a la habitación, pero nadie respondió. Finalmente, estaba en camino a la habitación 714 con la tarjeta llave. Ni siquiera encendí las luces al principio, simplemente me senté en la oscuridad de la habitación durante más de 1 hora. No fue difícil asegurarme de que no regresara a la habitación. Primero, empacé todas sus ropas y pertenencias personales. No dejé nada atrás. Revisé el paquete de Preven, todavía quedaban 10 pastillas en el tocador. De manera muy ordenada, estaban todos los artículos que necesitaría para su presentación al día siguiente. Comencé a llenar la maleta. Había 24 carpetas promocionales especialmente encuadernadas y otras 20 carpetas regulares, todas ellas fueron a la maleta. Un proyector digital fue lo siguiente, seguido de una computadora portátil. Tomé su bolso y su celular, que había dejado en la habitación, todo lo que tenía consigo era un bolso de mano y probablemente un tubo de lápiz labial. Di una vuelta por la habitación tan cuidadosamente como lo hizo ella para asegurarme de no perder nada. Una vez satisfecho, dejé las llaves del coche y mi anillo de bodas en el tocador. Aparte de esos 2 objetos, la habitación estaba completamente vacía. El ascensor se dirigió directamente al estacionamiento, no tuve problemas para llevar 2 maletas, y 20 minutos después, estaba en la autopista rumbo al norte. Pasaban las 3 de la madrugada, no tenía idea de que había pasado tanto tiempo. 1 hora o 2 después, sonó mi teléfono celular, la identificación de llamadas mostraba el número del listen. ¿Ion? Sí, ¿dónde estás? Estaré en casa pronto. Eso fue todo lo que dije, hubo silencio en el otro extremo de la línea. Los vendedores tienen un viejo dicho, el primero que habla pierde. Pareció una eternidad antes de que ella hablara. Ion, lo siento. No preguntó nada y simplemente colgó. Apagué mi teléfono, era obvio que había regresado a su habitación. Más tarde ese día, tenía que dar una presentación que salvaría a su empresa y le daría un ascenso. Metí las maletas en el desván del garaje, Sara nunca iba allí y nunca pensó en buscar algo allí. Por supuesto, en este punto, estoy bastante seguro de que no importaba. Primero, recogí todas mis ropas y pertenencias personales, la mayoría de los hombres tienen sus propias herramientas, generalmente es un requisito para el trabajo. Pasé por la tienda, cargué las mías en el Subaru y recogí mi último cheque de pago. Para entonces, los bancos ya estaban abiertos, no tuve que hacer ninguna manipulación financiera complicada. Simplemente retiré todo el dinero de mis cuentas. Almorcé en Hagerstown, Maryland. Tenía suficiente dinero para vivir durante unos años, pero sabía que estaría buscando trabajo muy pronto. Sara y yo éramos parecidos en eso de que a ambos nos encantaba trabajar. La voy a extrañar. Pasé un par de horas en las cuevas del Uray y alquilé una habitación cerca de Whitewell. No tenía idea de qué iba a hacer. Era sábado, y me encontré sentado en el acuario de Chattanooga, observando la naturaleza que nunca había visto antes. Pasé unas horas simplemente relajándome y decidí que era un buen lugar para estar. Compré un pase anual para el acuario y, para la hora de la cena, tenía un lugar donde quedarme. Era un remolque móvil en el parque, pero estaba amueblado y era económico. No necesitaba mucho. La primera cosa que haría el lunes por la mañana sería conseguir un trabajo. Un buen hombre de mantenimiento siempre puede conseguir un trabajo, especialmente si está dispuesto a trabajar duro. Podría permanecer discreto hasta que fuera el momento de renovar mi licencia de conducir o las etiquetas del coche, me preocuparé por eso cuando llegue el momento. El domingo por la tarde, llamé a Gloria. Me sentí obligado a informarle sobre lo que estaba sucediendo, pero Sara ya se lo había contado. Fue bastante franca con Gloria sobre lo que había pasado, dijo que había engañado, que la sorprendí, que me fui y que ella perdió su trabajo. Me sentí mal porque ella perdió su trabajo, pero ese era el precio que tenía que pagar. Le pedí a Gloria que le dijera a Josh lo que estaba sucediendo la próxima vez que hablara con él. También le dije que la llamaría aproximadamente una vez al mes para verificar cómo iban las cosas. No le dije dónde estaba. Para el mediodía del día siguiente, tenía un trabajo. En realidad, estaba a poca distancia del parque de remolques, con el Waffle House a mitad de camino. ¿Qué más podría querer un hombre? No sé cómo manejaron el papeleo, pero me estaban pagando $20 por hora sin hacer preguntas. Estaba feliz, y ellos también. Ni siquiera tendría que tocar el dinero que traje conmigo. Unos 2 meses después, Gloria me informó que Sara se había mudado de la casa y estaba viviendo con sus padres. Gloria no sabía nada más, pero estaba feliz de que estuviera estable y le estuviera yendo bien. Josh me llamó desde San Diego solo para informarme que iba a hacer un crucero. Era técnico en aviónica en un portaaviones, intentó explicar qué hacía exactamente, pero estaba más allá de mi comprensión. Nunca supe mucho sobre cosas técnicas. Ambos tuvieron cuidado de no decir nada malo sobre su madre, aprecié eso. Después de eso, todo siguió como siempre. Comencé a hablar con Gloria al menos semanalmente, Josh y yo comenzamos a enviar correos electrónicos regularmente. Gloria hablaba regularmente con Sara, pero decía muy poco sobre lo que estaba haciendo o dónde estaba. Nunca presenté la solicitud de divorcio, y parece que Sara tampoco lo hizo. Tengo una licencia de conducir de Tennessee y las etiquetas en el Subaru. Comencé a frecuentar un bar local un par de veces al mes y tuve encuentros casuales. 2 mujeres se alternaban como mis compañeras nocturnas regulares. No buscaban compromisos, y yo tampoco. Parecía funcionar bien para todos nosotros. La vida era buena. Eso fue hace mucho tiempo, y gradualmente olvidé a Sara. Con el tiempo, el Subaru comenzó a darme problemas. Había olvidado cuánto tiempo había pasado. Tenía más de 200.000 millas. Estaba reflexionando sobre esto con una jarra de cerveza un día cuando me di cuenta de que habían pasado casi 5 años desde que me fui de casa. Mantuve un contacto cercano con ambos hijos. Gloria ya tenía 2 hijos propios en este momento y quería que los visitara. Josh casi se casó con una mujer tailandesa, pero en el último momento se negó. Por lo general, trabajaba 6 días a la semana y usaba el domingo para recuperarme del sábado por la noche. No había ninguna buena razón para que alguien llamara a la puerta de mi remolque a las 6 de la mañana de un viernes. Su grosería fue recompensada por un hombre medio desnudo abriendo la puerta. Los calzoncillos del día son repugnantes, y la dama en la puerta, juzgando por la expresión en su rostro, estuvo de acuerdo conmigo. Ella apartó la mirada, pero su compañero no parecía impresionado. Norm habría usado pantalones, pero en un momento como este, los invitados me molestaron. Estamos buscando a John Terrell. No los conozco. Me llamo David Simmons, y esta es mi esposa Mara. Tenemos un problema y esperamos que nos puedas ayudar. Lo siento mucho, no trabajo a altas horas de la noche. Si necesitan algo relacionado con su auto, tendrán que ir a la tienda. Esto provocó varias miradas en blanco y finalmente una respuesta. No tiene nada que ver con tu trabajo, es más un problema personal. ¿Podemos entrar? El interior del remolque lucía desordenado, rara vez tenía invitados, así que rara vez lo limpiaba. Incluso mis novias insistían en que fuéramos a su lugar. Hagan como en su casa, déjenme ponerme los pantalones enseguida. Al entrar en el dormitorio, dejé la puerta abierta solo para mostrarles lo hospitalario que soy. También me puse una camisa. ¿Les gustaría tomar café? Solo tomará unos 10 minutos. Aparté algunas cosas del sofá para que pudieran sentarse. No hubo respuesta a la pregunta del café. Tenemos una hija adoptiva de 4 años y otra de 2 que necesita un trasplante de médula ósea, y esperamos que nos puedas ayudar. Estamos dispuestos a pagarte si es necesario. ¿Con mi médula ósea? No, queremos usarla y estamos dispuestos a compensarte por cualquier inconveniente. Creo que quieren comprarla. Estaba actuando como un listillo, y de repente me di cuenta de ello. Estas personas eran serias, tenían un problema real y estaban buscando ayuda. Lo siento mucho, no quise interrumpir. Por favor, continúen. Nuestra mejor oportunidad de encontrar un donante es un familiar cercano. Eres nuestra mejor esperanza. Mira esto. No quiero ser un grosero, pero creo que se equivocaron de persona. ¿Cuándo nació su hija? Cumplirá 5 años en julio. Marcia Simmons habló por primera vez, y sonó sincera. Odio ser el portador de malas noticias, pero me hice una vasectomía hace 15 años. No hay forma de que pueda ser su padre. ¿Por qué tu nombre estaba en el certificado de nacimiento? No puedo responder eso, tal vez deberían preguntarle a su madre. Esa afirmación fue recibida con silencio. Sentí pena por estas personas, pero no sabía cómo ayudarles. ¿Cuál es el nombre de la madre? Sarah Lise Terrell. No encontraba las palabras. Tal vez no debería haber tomado esas malditas pastillas de ella, por supuesto, entonces esas personas no tendrían una hija en absoluto. Todo lo que pensaba que había superado el dolor, y aquí está de nuevo, viejos recuerdos de mi esposa teniendo relaciones sexuales con ese maldito político de Filadelfia. Estaba empezando a olvidarlo todo, y ahora estaba de vuelta. Maldita sea. Ahora entiendo y pido disculpas por mi grosería e insensibilidad. Haré todo lo que esté en mi poder para ayudarles. En primer lugar, porque no puede Sara hacerse un trasplante de médula ósea. Médicamente, no puede. ¿Por qué no? Es madre, tiene que ser una donante adecuada. O, ella es una donante adecuada, pero está demasiado enferma. Los médicos se negaron siquiera a considerar utilizarla. ¿Enferma de qué? Está muriendo de insuficiencia hepática. Le quedan menos de 6 meses de vida. Esto no tiene sentido. Siempre ha estado perfectamente sana. Además, no creo que un hígado enfermo le impida donar médula ósea. El hospital no aceptará su firma en el formulario de consentimiento. ¿Estás diciendo que hay algo mal en su cabeza? Ambos me miraron en silencio, sabían la respuesta, pero no querían decirlo. En ese momento, no quería que se sintieran aún más incómodos. Hace 10 minutos, no me importaban, pero ahora sentía que tenía que protegerlos y ayudarlos. ¿Cómo sucedió esto? ¿Podría alguno de mis hijos ayudar? Quizás, pero pensamos que eras nuestra mejor esperanza. ¿Por qué no van tras su padre, su verdadero padre? Pensamos que eras tú. No tenemos ni idea de quién más podría ser. Sara no nos dijo nada sobre otro posible padre. De hecho, ella no estaba en condiciones de explicar nada, agregó Mara. Obtuvimos la mayoría de nuestra información de la agencia de adopción. Tuve que preparar café y hacer pis, permítanme un momento. Dejé a mis invitados sentados mientras preparaba el café. Solo tomó unos minutos. Mientras se preparaba, fui al baño, algo que necesitaba hacer urgentemente. Traté de ser discreto, ya había avergonzado lo suficiente a Mara. ¿Dónde viven? En Westchester, Pensilvania. Les haré una oferta. Si les digo quién es el verdadero padre de su hija, deben prometerme que lo perseguirán sin descanso hasta obtener lo que desean. ¿De qué estás hablando? El padre de su hija es un político prominente en Pensilvania. Por supuesto, negará todo y probablemente les proporcionará documentos legales para detener sus esfuerzos. Si acuerdan presionar lo suficiente para que él admita que la niña es suya, podrán avergonzarlo y obligarlo a hacerse un trasplante de médula ósea. Eso es lo que quieren, ¿verdad? Sí, claro, pero ¿cómo hacemos eso? No lo sé. Soy mecánico. Trabajo con metal para ganarme la vida. Creo que la mejor manera sería utilizar la televisión, la radio y los periódicos. Los políticos harán cualquier cosa para evitar una mala publicidad. ¿Tienen amigos que puedan ayudar? Bueno, ahora ambos estaban sonriendo. Debo haber dicho algo que les dio esperanza. Creo que podemos hacer esto. ¿Quién demonios es él? Malcolm Eugene Foote. Se postula para el Senado de los Estados Unidos. Apuesto a que hará cualquier cosa para evitar una mala publicidad. El café estaba listo, pero David y Marshall no podían esperar para llegar a casa. Antes de irse, les dije cómo ponerse en contacto con Gloria y Josh en caso de que los necesitaran. Estaba seguro de que ayudarían. También les pedí que me dijeran dónde estaba Sara. Probablemente estaría en Pensacola antes de que ellos regresaran a Westchester. Me corté el pelo y compré una camisa nueva. Sara era una tramposa que arruinó mi vida, pero aún así quería lucir bien cuando la viera. Era otro remolque, pero esta vez era un bonito doble nuevo. Allí estaba su Volvo con una llanta desinflada y un parabrisas roto. La mujer que abrió la puerta no era Sara, parecía que la habían empapado fuerte y la habían dejado empapada. Tenía al menos 45, tal vez 50, y debió haber tenido una vida difícil. La falta de maquillaje no ayudaba, y simplemente se veía horrible. No tuve la oportunidad de abrir la boca. Caray, si no es John Terrell. Nunca esperé verte aquí. Tuve que usar la vieja línea, me estás poniendo en desventaja. Sherry Hart. Pasa, entra. ¿Quieres una cerveza? No, pero gracias. Estoy aquí para ver a Sara. Serry cruzó la habitación y se detuvo en el buffet del comedor. Aquí está, Ion. Mírala todo lo que quieras. Su mano señalaba una urna de latón que estaba en el centro del buffet vacío. Supongo que llegué demasiado tarde. No me moví, solo me quedé mirando el contenedor frente a mí. ¿Puedo tomar una cerveza ahora? Sara se mudó a Pensacola después de dar a su bebé en adopción. Compró el remolque con el dinero que recibió de Bixler Enterprises después de que la despidieron. Tenía una participación en las ganancias, 401k, y vacaciones y días de enfermedad. Eventualmente, consiguió un trabajo en una fábrica local de prendas de vestir donde trabajaba en el departamento de envíos. Allí fue donde conoció a Serry. Serry alquilaba una habitación de Sara. Cada centavo que Sara ganaba iba para el alcohol. Empezó con vino y gradualmente pasó a bebidas más fuertes, las más baratas. Eventualmente, perdió su trabajo debido a su alcoholismo y se vio obligada a usar sus ahorros. Nunca salió con nadie ni salió a ningún lado. Serry se quedó con ella, pagó sus servicios públicos y compró alimentos que Sara no comía. Le llevó más de 3 años quitarse la vida. Increíblemente, ella tenía un testamento y me dejó un doble remolque y un Volvo. Serry explicó que Sara estaba tan angustiada por lo que había hecho que simplemente se rindió. No intentó evitar el embarazo ni siquiera terminarlo. La adopción se había arreglado meses antes de que naciera el bebé. Nunca volvió a trabajar, excepto en los trabajos clandestinos que hacía mal. Serry dijo que Sara no parecía tener ambición ni propósito en la vida. Sara hablaba mucho de mí pero tenía miedo de intentar contactarme. Gloria le dio mi número, pero nunca me llamó. Era como si su aventura de una noche la hubiera lastimado más a ella que a mí. Estuve allí durante 2 semanas y luego vendí el remolque de Serry por $1 y obtuve $3,000 por el Volvo. 2 días después, estaba en Westchester visitando a mis nuevos amigos David y Marche. Malcolm Eugene Foot resistió al principio, pero David y Marche lo presionaron hasta que cedió. Insistió en pruebas de ADN, que demostraron que era el padre. Para salvar la cara, más o menos lo obligaron a someterse a un trasplante de médula ósea, que fue exitoso. La carrera política y la vida familiar de Malcolm no dejaron una impresión favorable. Su caída en las encuestas fue tan rápida que el partido lo reemplazó por otro candidato unos meses antes de las elecciones. Su esposa solicitó el divorcio y fue muy pública al respecto. Sara y yo estamos viajando ahora a Dallas para ver a Gloria y a mis nietos. No sé cuánto tiempo mantendré a Sara conmigo, probablemente hasta que tenga a alguien.